The sun was setting as Special Agent Angela Rodriguez drove down Maple Avenue. She'd been working since 6 that morning, finishing paperwork on a case that had kept her busy for weeks. Her dark blue sedan was nothing fancy, just her personal car she used to blend in when she wasn't on official business. After 12 hours at the FBI field office, all she wanted was to get home, kick off her shoes, and maybe watch that new show everyone at work kept talking about. Angela adjusted the radio, humming along to an old song she remembered from high school. The street was peaceful, lined with tall trees and neat houses with well-kept lawns. Few cars were out at this hour in this quiet part of town. She was thinking about whether she had enough ingredients at home to make a quick dinner or if she should just order takeout when bright flashing lights suddenly lit up her rearview mirror. What now? She sighed, checking her speed. She hadn't been going fast, maybe 3 miles over the limit at most. She signaled and pulled over to the right, stopping carefully by the curb. Years of training kicked in automatically. She turned off the engine, placed her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen, and waited. Through her side mirror, Angela watched as Officer Thomas Reynolds stepped out of his patrol car. He was tall with broad shoulders, moving with the confident stride of someone used to being in charge. His hand rested casually near his holster, standard procedure, but something about his posture made Angela pay closer attention. Just a routine stop, she told herself, taking a deep breath. Nothing to worry about. She rolled down her window as the officer approached. The cooling evening air rushed in, bringing with it the scent of someone's backyard barbecue from down the street. Angela had done nothing wrong, so this would be quick and simple. She'd show her license, maybe get a warning, and be on her way home in a few minutes. What Angela didn't know was that Officer Reynolds had received a call about a suspicious vehicle matching her car's description just 20 minutes earlier. The report mentioned a woman fitting her general appearance who allegedly had been involved in a shoplifting incident at a nearby store. It was a case of mistaken identity that was about to go terribly wrong. License and registration, Officer Reynolds said flatly, without introducing himself or explaining why he'd pulled her over. His face was hard to read in the growing darkness, but his tone was sharp. "Good evening, officer," Angela replied politely. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" The question seemed to irritate him. His posture stiffened, and he placed his hand more firmly on his weapon. "I said license and registration. Now." A couple walking their dog on the opposite sidewalk slowed down, watching the scene with curious eyes. The husband whispered something to his wife, both of them sensing the unusual tension in what should have been a normal traffic stop. "Of course," Angela said calmly, though her instincts were now on high alert. Something wasn't right about this officer's attitude. "My registration is in the glove compartment, and my wallet is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" She moved her right hand slowly toward the glove compartment, making sure her movements were clear and deliberate. Years of law enforcement training had taught her how to act in situations like this. What she didn't expect was what happened next. As Angela's hand moved slowly toward the glove compartment, Officer Reynolds suddenly tensed up. The streetlight above cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the deep frown lines around his mouth. His eyes narrowed as he watched her every move. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice sharp enough to make the couple walking their dog across the street stop in their tracks. Angela froze, her heart suddenly beating faster. She'd been in tense situations before during her 8 years with the FBI, but something felt different about this. Wrong. She carefully returned her hands to the steering wheel. "Officer, I was just reaching for my registration as you asked," she explained, keeping her voice steady and calm. The training from countless high-pressure situations kicked in automatically. "I'm happy to comply with your instructions. Would you prefer I tell you where my documents are and you retrieve them?" Officer Reynolds didn't respond to her question. Instead, he leaned slightly to peer into her car, his flashlight beam sweeping across the interior. The bright light momentarily blinded Angela, making her blink and turn away. His posture remained rigid, suspicious. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. A small knot of worry formed in Angela's stomach. This wasn't standard procedure for a simple traffic violation. The couple across the street had stopped walking altogether now, the husband pulling out his phone. They were too far away for Angela to see clearly what he was doing, but she suspected he might be recording. These days, people often documented police interactions. "May I ask why, officer?" "I haven't done anything wrong," Angela asked, still maintaining her composure despite the growing tension. "Because I said so," Reynolds snapped. "Now step out slowly with your hands visible." The night air had grown cooler, and a slight breeze rustled the leaves of the maple trees lining the street. A car drove by, slowing down as the driver noticed the police lights. Angela weighed her options carefully. As a federal agent, she knew her rights, but she also understood that escalating the situation could be dangerous. "All right, I'm opening the door now," she announced clearly, pushing it open with deliberate slowness. As she stepped out, the officer immediately backed up, creating distance between them. His hand now rested openly on his weapon. "Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the car," he instructed, his voice tight with authority. Angela complied, the metal of her car roof cool beneath her palms. "Officer Reynolds," she said, reading his name tag in the reflection of her window, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just driving home from work. We got a call about a suspect matching your description involved in a theft at Wilson's department store," he replied, his tone suggesting he'd already made up his mind about her guilt. "The suspect was driving a dark sedan just like yours." Angela felt a flash of frustration. She'd never even been to Wilson's department store. "That wasn't mean, officer. I've been at work all day at the federal building downtown." "Yeah, right," Officer Reynolds scoffed, clearly not believing her. "Everyone's innocent, aren't they?" The couple across the street had definitely started recording now, the husband holding his phone up, while the wife spoke urgently into her own phone. Their dog sat obediently at their feet, watching the scene with curious eyes. "I can prove where I've been," Angela said carefully. "My ID and credentials are in my purse on the passenger seat." "Credentials?" Reynolds repeated with obvious skepticism. "What kind of credentials?" Angela took a deep breath. She hadn't wanted to play this card so soon, but the situation was deteriorating quickly. "I'm a federal agent, Officer Reynolds. I work for the FBI. My badge and ID are in my purse." For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, unexpectedly, Officer Reynolds laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh, but one filled with disbelief and something else, something that made Angela's professional instincts flare with warning. Part 3. Dangerous Escalation. When Tanya reached slowly for her glove compartment to retrieve her registration, Officer Kendricks suddenly drew his weapon, pointing it directly at her and shouting commands. Bystanders across the street froze in shock, with one beginning to record the incident on their phone. Tanya raised her hands, keeping them visible, and calmly identified herself as a federal agent. "I'm Special Agent Angela Rodriguez with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she repeated, her voice clear and firm despite the gun pointed at her chest. The weight of those words hung in the air between them. "My credentials are in my purse on the passenger seat. I need to reach for them." Slowly. Officer Reynolds' face twisted into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Sure you are," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "and I'm the President of the United States." Angela took a steady breath. She'd faced armed suspects before, but never expected to be on this end of a police officer's weapon. The growing crowd of onlookers across the street had fallen silent, their faces illuminated by the flashing blue and red lights. More phones were out now, recording everything. "Officer, I understand your caution," Angela said carefully, thinking through each word. "But pointing your weapon at a federal agent is a serious offense. I'm going to reach very slowly for my credentials, okay? Please watch my movements." Without waiting for his permission, but moving with deliberate slowness, Angela began to turn toward her car. Reynolds tensed but didn't stop her as she leaned in through the open driver's door. The interior light clicked on, illuminating the black leather purse on the passenger seat. "I'm unzipping the side pocket now," she narrated, making sure he could see exactly what she was doing. Her fingers closed around the familiar leather wallet that held her badge. She pulled it out with 2 fingers, then straightened up and turned to face the officer again. "Here. This is my FBI identification," she said, holding it out for him to see. The gold badge caught the streetlight, gleaming against the dark leather. Officer Reynolds lowered his gun slightly, just enough to take the badge with his free hand. He flipped it open, examining it under his flashlight. The official photograph showed Angela in her formal bureau attire, her hair pulled back professionally, her expression serious. Next to it, the eagle emblem of the FBI was unmistakable, along with her credentials and ID number. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across his face. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed out loud. "Nice fake," he said, tossing the badge back at her. It hit her shoulder and fell to the pavement with a dull thud. "Where'd you get this, the internet?" "Halloween store. You could get 5 years for impersonating a federal officer, you know that?" Angela stared at him in disbelief, then at her official credentials lying in the street gutter. The disrespect of that action hit her harder than she expected. Through 15 years of law enforcement work, including 8 with the FBI, she'd earned that badge through hard work, dedication, and sacrifice. "That is a legitimate FBI badge," she said, her voice taking on an edge of authority she usually reserved for interrogation rooms. "Badge number 7642, issued by the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That badge represents federal authority." Throwing it on the ground was a mistake, Officer Reynolds. The crowd across the street had grown larger now. Someone had parked their car with headlights facing the scene, creating an impromptu spotlight. Angela noticed an older woman in a bathrobe standing on her front porch, phone pressed to her ear, watching intently. "Lady, I don't care what kind of fantasy world you're living in," Reynolds said, the gun still partially raised. "But this little game ends now. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Angela stood her ground. "No, Officer Reynolds, this has gone far enough. I am exercising my right as a federal agent to identify myself. You are now interfering with a federal officer in the performance of her duties." "Performance of duties?" he mocked. "Driving home is official FBI business now." "Even off duty, I am still a federal agent," she replied. "And right now, I'm officially requesting that you call your supervisor to the scene." Officer Reynolds' expression hardened. "Get on the ground now," he shouted, raising his weapon fully again. What he didn't know was that Angela had already pressed the emergency alert button on her FBI-issued phone when he first drew his weapon. The small device in her pocket had silently sent her GPS coordinates and an officer in distress signal to the nearest bureau resources. It was standard procedure for all field agents after an incident 3 years ago when an undercover agent had been killed during a routine traffic stop. "I will not get on the ground," Angela said, her voice calm but resolute. "You are making a very serious mistake, Officer Reynolds, one that could end your career. I suggest you lower your weapon immediately." The standoff had reached its breaking point. Reynolds' finger hovered near the trigger, his face flushed with anger and perhaps a flicker of uncertainty. Angela stood perfectly still, her training kicking in to manage the crisis. The night air was thick with tension, broken only by the hum of the police car's engine and the whispers of the growing crowd of witnesses. The standoff might have lasted only seconds, but to Angela it felt like hours. Her heart pounded in her chest, but years of training kept her outwardly calm as she stared down the barrel of Officer Reynolds' gun. The night had grown quiet except for the occasional whisper from the watching crowd. Then came the sound that changed everything, the distant wail of sirens cutting through the tension. Officer Reynolds glanced over his shoulder, momentarily distracted. "I didn't call for backup," he muttered, confusion crossing his face. "I didn't need to call anyone," Angela replied, allowing herself a small breath of relief. "FBI agents have an emergency system. When I pressed my alert button earlier, it automatically sent my location to nearby federal agents." 2 black SUVs with tinted windows came speeding around the corner, emergency lights flashing but no markings visible on their exteriors. They screeched to a halt behind Officer Reynolds' patrol car, blocking it in. The doors flew open, and 3 people in dark suits emerged, moving with practiced precision. "Federal agents, lower your weapon," shouted a tall woman with short gray hair, her own gun drawn and FBI credentials clearly displayed in her other hand. The 2 men with her took flanking positions, their movements suggesting years of tactical training. Officer Reynolds froze, his eyes darting between Angela and the newcomers, suddenly realizing the gravity of his situation. His hand trembled slightly, but the gun remained pointed at Angela. "I said lower your weapon, officer," the gray-haired agent repeated, her voice carrying absolute authority. "You are pointing a firearm at Special Agent Rodriguez of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is your final warning." The crowd across the street had fallen completely silent. Even the night insects seemed to pause their chirping as everyone watched to see what would happen next. Finally, Officer Reynolds slowly lowered his gun, the fight visibly draining from his body as the reality of his mistake sank in. "Holster your weapon," the senior agent instructed. When Reynolds complied, she nodded to one of her colleagues, who moved forward to stand beside Angela. "You okay, Rodriguez?" he asked quietly, concern evident in his voice. "I'm fine, Chen," Angela replied, recognizing her colleague from the downtown office. "Thanks for the quick response." Agent Chen bent down to retrieve Angela's badge from where it had fallen, wiping it clean before handing it back to her with a respectful nod. The gray-haired woman approached Officer Reynolds, who now looked considerably smaller than he had minutes before. "I'm Special Agent Patricia Howard, Assistant Director of the FBI Field Office. Would you care to explain why you were holding one of my agents at gunpoint?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "There was a report of a suspect matching her description. I was just following procedure." Following procedure includes verifying credentials when presented, not throwing a federal badge on the ground, Howard replied coolly. By now, another vehicle had arrived, a police supervisor's car with lights flashing. A heavy-set man in a police lieutenant's uniform hurried from the car, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "What's going on here?" Lieutenant Wilson asked, taking in the scene, the FBI agents, his officer looking distinctly uncomfortable, and the growing crowd of onlookers still recording everything. "Lieutenant," Agent Howard said, turning to face him, "we have a serious situation. One of your officers drew and pointed his weapon at a federal agent who identified herself properly. He then refused to acknowledge her credentials and escalated the situation unnecessarily." Lieutenant Wilson's face fell as he processed this information. He looked at Reynolds with disbelief. "Is this true, officer?" Reynolds stared at his shoes, not answering directly. "I thought she was lying about being FBI." The badge looked. "I mean, you hear about fake badges." "That's not a fake badge," Lieutenant Wilson said, his voice heavy with disappointment as he recognized the standard-issue FBI credentials in Angela's hand. "That's the real deal." Angela finally allowed herself to relax slightly, rolling her shoulders to release the tension that had built up. The night air felt cooler now against her skin, the immediate danger past. Across the street, people were still watching and recording, some talking excitedly into their phones. This incident would likely be on social media within minutes. "Lieutenant," Agent Howard continued, her tone professional but unyielding, "given the seriousness of what has transpired here, we need to take appropriate action immediately." Lieutenant Wilson nodded grimly. He turned to Officer Reynolds. "Hand over your badge and gun, Reynolds. You're suspended pending a full investigation." "What?" Reynolds protested, his face flushing. "You can't just." "I can and I am," the lieutenant cut him off. "Drawing your weapon on a federal agent? Refusing to acknowledge proper credentials? We're lucky this didn't end in tragedy." Agent Howard stepped closer to Reynolds, her voice dropping to ensure only those nearby could hear. "Actually, Lieutenant, given the circumstances, I believe more immediate action is warranted. Given Officer Reynolds' actions tonight, drawing a weapon on a federal agent, refusing to acknowledge proper credentials, and creating a dangerous situation, we need to place him in custody," Agent Howard stated firmly. "This goes beyond a departmental issue. It's a federal offense." Lieutenant Wilson looked pained but nodded in agreement. "You're right. The protocol is clear in these situations." He turned to Officer Reynolds. "Turn around, Reynolds." "You can't be serious," Reynolds protested, his voice rising with panic. "It was just a misunderstanding. I was doing my job." "Your job doesn't include threatening federal agents," Lieutenant Wilson replied, his tone hardening. "Now turn around. Don't make this worse than it already is." The crowd across the street had grown even larger. Someone had brought out folding chairs, as if settling in to watch a movie. Phones continued to record as Reynolds slowly turned around, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Agent Chen stepped forward with handcuffs. "Officer Michael Reynolds, you're being detained for threatening a federal officer in the performance of her duties. You have the right to remain silent." He began reciting the Miranda rights while securing the cuffs around Reynolds' wrists. The clicking sound of the handcuffs echoed in the quiet street. Reynolds stood motionless, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. His face had lost all color, and his earlier confidence had vanished completely. Angela watched silently. Despite everything that had happened, she felt no satisfaction seeing Reynolds in handcuffs, just professional relief that the situation had been resolved without anyone getting hurt. "Rodriguez," Agent Howard called to her. "We need your statement. Let's move over to the vehicle." As they walked toward one of the FBI SUVs, Lieutenant Wilson pulled out his phone and stepped away from the group, his expression grim as he made what was surely an unpleasant call to his superiors. The older woman who had been watching from her porch approached Angela cautiously. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, genuine concern in her eyes. "I called 911 when I saw him pull that gun on you. I was so worried." "Thank you," Angela replied with a tired smile. "That was very brave of you." "Not brave," the woman said, shaking her head. "Just right. I've lived on this street for 42 years. Never thought I'd see something like this happen here." Agent Howard gestured for Angela to continue toward the vehicle, and she nodded goodbye to the woman. As they reached the SUV, Howard opened a laptop mounted to the dashboard. "We need to document everything while it's fresh," she explained. "Your statement, photos of the scene, witness information." Angela nodded, slipping into professional mode despite her exhaustion. The dashcam from his patrol car should have captured most of it. "Already requested the footage," Howard confirmed. "And tech is collecting videos from witnesses' phones. This will be an airtight case." Inside the police car, Reynolds sat alone, his face visible through the window. He stared straight ahead, the gravity of his actions written across his features. His career was likely over. There might even be criminal charges depending on how the FBI and the district attorney decided to proceed. Lieutenant Wilson approached, his phone call finished. "Just spoke with the chief," he told Agent Howard. "He sends his deepest apologies and assures full cooperation with your investigation." He turned to Angela. "And he extends his personal apologies to you, Agent Rodriguez. This is not how our department operates." "I understand," Angela replied diplomatically. "One officer's actions don't reflect on your entire department." While they were talking, a news van pulled up at the end of the street. A reporter and cameraman jumped out, moving quickly toward the scene. "Great," Lieutenant Wilson muttered. "Just what we need." "Public has a right to know," Howard said with a shrug. "Transparency is essential, especially in cases like this." Agent Chen joined them, holding a tablet. "You're going to want to see this," he said, handing it to Howard. On the screen was Reynolds' service record. 3 civilian complaints in the past 2 years, all from minorities, all during traffic stops, all dismissed without investigation. Howard's expression darkened as she reviewed the information. "Looks like Officer Reynolds has a pattern of behavior that someone's been covering up." Lieutenant Wilson looked genuinely shocked. "I had no idea. Those complaints should have triggered automatic reviews." "Well, they didn't," Howard replied. "But they will now." She turned to another agent who had been questioning witnesses. "What are you hearing from the neighbors?" "Several people mentioned similar experiences with this officer," the agent reported. "Disproportionate responses, aggressive behavior during routine encounters. One man said Reynolds drew his weapon during a stop for a broken taillight last month." Angela took a deep breath, processing what she was hearing. What had happened to her wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger problem that had been ignored for too long. "This goes beyond tonight," she said quietly. "The department needs a thorough review of its practices." Lieutenant Wilson nodded solemnly. "You're right. And it will happen, I promise you that." He looked back at Reynolds sitting in the police car. "Starting with a complete investigation into every interaction Officer Reynolds has had in the last 5 years." The news crew was getting closer now, the reporter already speaking into her microphone as the cameraman filmed the scene. "I'll handle the press," Howard decided. "Rodriguez, finish your statement with Chen. Lieutenant, you might want to call your public affairs office." As everyone moved to their tasks, Angela found herself alone for a moment. She looked down at her FBI badge in her hand, then across at Reynolds in the police car. What had started as a routine traffic stop had turned into something much more significant. Sometimes justice arrived in unexpected ways. The night wasn't over yet. There would be hours of paperwork, statements, and procedures ahead. But for now, Angela took a moment to breathe and center herself as the first flash of cameras began to illuminate the scene. 3 months after that fateful night on Maple Avenue, Angela sat in a community center meeting room, watching people file in and take their seats. The room buzzed with conversation as local residents, police officers, and city officials gathered together. A large banner hung on the wall: Community Police Relations Task Force Monthly Forum. Angela straightened her blue blazer and reviewed her notes one last time. As the newly appointed head of this special task force, she would be leading today's discussion. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Agent Howard: "Knock 'em dead. Call me after." The wooden podium felt solid beneath her hands as she stepped up to address the crowd. Faces turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical, all attentive. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "For those who don't know me, I'm Special Agent Angela Rodriguez with the FBI. 3 months ago, I was pulled over less than a mile from where we're sitting now." A murmur went through the audience. The incident had made national news, the bystander videos going viral overnight. Everyone in the room knew what had happened. What began as a routine traffic stop turned into something that changed not just my life, but our entire community, Angela continued. "Tonight, I don't want to focus on the negative aspects of that encounter. Instead, I want to talk about the progress we've made since then and the work we still have ahead of us." She clicked a button, and the screen behind her displayed a list of initiatives that had been implemented in the past 90 days. The audience quieted as they read the impressive results: mandatory body cameras for all officers, a civilian review board with real authority, de-escalation training for every member of the department, a new transparent complaint system that ensures nothing gets swept under the rug. Angela listed them proudly. These aren't just policy changes on paper. These are real steps toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community we serve. In the front row, Lieutenant Wilson nodded in agreement. The past 3 months had been challenging for the police department, but he'd become one of Angela's strongest allies in pushing for meaningful change. The investigation into former Officer Reynolds' conduct revealed 27 instances of excessive force or improper procedure over his 8-year career. Angela continued, her tone serious but not accusatory. 17 of those cases involved minority drivers during traffic stops, and in every case, his reports were approved without question, complaints were dismissed without investigation, and the pattern continued. She paused, letting that sink in. But that's not the important part of this story. What matters is what happened next. Clicking to the next slide, she showed a photograph of the police department's new training program in action. The department didn't deny there was a problem. They didn't make excuses. Instead, they committed to real change. Lieutenant Wilson stood up. "May I add something, Agent Rodriguez?" Angela nodded, stepping aside to give him the podium. "When this incident first happened, many officers were defensive," he admitted to the crowd. "We felt attacked, like one bad apple was making us all look terrible. But as the investigation progressed, we had to face some uncomfortable truths. The problem wasn't just one officer. The problem was a system that allowed his behavior to continue unchecked." An older woman in the audience stood up, the same neighbor who had called 911 the night of the incident. "I've lived here for decades," she said. "This is the first time I've ever felt like the police were actually listening to us." Applause rippled through the room. Angela smiled at the woman, grateful for her continued involvement in the community. As the meeting continued, residents shared their experiences, both positive and negative, with local law enforcement. Officers spoke about the challenges they faced and the improvements they were seeing with the new training. The conversation was sometimes difficult, occasionally emotional, but always respectful. This was the 4th such forum they'd held, and each one had drawn a larger crowd than the last. Near the end of the evening, a young officer raised her hand. "I joined the force last month," she said, And during training, they showed us the video of what happened with Agent Rodriguez and Officer Reynolds. They used it as an example of how quickly things can go wrong when bias and poor judgment take over. It made a real impression on all of us rookies. Angela hadn't known about this. She glanced at Lieutenant Wilson, who nodded in confirmation. "That video saved lives," he said simply. "Maybe not in a dramatic way we can point to, but by teaching new officers what not to do, by showing them the consequences of those actions, it matters." As the meeting wrapped up, people lingered to talk in small groups. The atmosphere was different from earlier gatherings, less tense, more collaborative. Angela packed up her materials, satisfied with the progress, but aware of how much work still lay ahead. A young man approached her as she was preparing to leave. "Agent Rodriguez? I just wanted to say thank you. My little brother wants to be an FBI agent because of you. He saw you on the news." Touched, Angela smiled. "Tell him it's a lot of hard work, but worth it." Outside, the evening air was cool and pleasant. Angela walked to her car, reflecting on everything that had happened. The incident that could have ended in tragedy had instead become a catalyst for positive change. Her phone rang. Agent Howard checking in as promised. "How did it go?" Howard asked. "Really well," Angela replied, looking back at the community center where people were still exiting, talking animatedly with one another. 3 months ago, I was just trying to get home after a long day. I never expected to end up leading a task force or becoming the face of police reform in this community." "Sometimes that's how it works," Howard said thoughtfully. "The most important changes come from unexpected moments." As Angela drove home along Maple Avenue, the same street where it had all started, she passed a police car parked at the curb. The officer inside smiled and waved at her. She waved back. One incident, one moment of confrontation, and from it, a community transformed. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. Sometimes justice worked in unexpected ways, and change came from the most unlikely circumstances. And tomorrow, they would continue the work of building trust, one conversation at a time.